it's me, Bella again. Are you curious about the next part of my story? So, before I tell you what happened next to me, just have a quick refresher. In the last episode, I got to work in Starcross Estate Company, and there's this girl called Diana, who constantly bothers me. She even said that my boyfriend Ed loved her and told me to break up with him. Of course, I'd not be fooled by her, but the fact that Ed's behavior became more and more cold to me made me feel anxious. Later on, Ed had a long business trip with Diane. Whilst I was in need of his reassurance, he still kept his coldness towards me. That's why we ended up having a big fight. Then he sent his friend Jim to take me out for the day, instead of coming round himself. I had a wonderful day with Jim, but later that night, I may have ended up drinking one too many cocktails and shots and telling Jim how upset I felt. Then I asked him whose side he'd be on if Ed ever betrayed me. Jim looked a bit awkward, but then he said, "Ed's a good guy with morals, and he's mad about you. I couldn't imagine him ever looking at another girl." I drained my drink. Yeah, I know, bad idea. Then I slurred out, "You have to say that. You're his best friend. You might just think I'm overthinking stuff, but you're not a girl. You don't understand how much it hurts." Jim looked at me with a firm voice. He said, "I truly believe him. So I'm going to make a deal with you that if Ed ever did cheat on you, then I'd help you get your own back." At this point, I was really surprised. But then I knew that even though Jim was so certain as much, it was only due to his complete trust in Ed. So I just shrugged it off and gave him a smile. After that, Jim took me home. He helped me to open the car door, and before I entered my house, he said, "Bella, don't think too much about it at all." That night, I lay there thinking about what Jim had said to me at the bar. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was true that I was overthinking things. And also, if I kept being like this, wasn't this exactly what Diane wanted me to act like? Geez, it seemed she was way smarter than she looked, as she got into my head. I couldn't let her win. I needed to trust in Ed. So I texted Ed, "I'm sorry. I was so stressed that I blamed you, but I was wrong to do this. I miss you so much." Although it's midnight, he replied immediately saying, "It's okay. I'm sorry too. I promise I'll spend more time with you. I'll be around more in 2 weeks." His words made me feel a lot better. Finally, I could rest my mind and fall asleep. The next 2 weeks seemed to drag on forever. I missed him so much. Okay, so he didn't call me all that much, but it was okay. He promised he'd spend more time with me soon. So I decided to trust him. 2 weeks passed by. He'd fly back home on this Sunday, and I arrived at the airport to pick him up. I dressed up in a pretty dress, held a bouquet of flowers, and waited for him at the boarding gate. Normally, I hesitated to do stuff like this because I knew there'd be a company shuttle coming to pick him and his colleagues up, but I'd waited for this moment long enough. Besides, I honestly thought he'd be super excited to see me. I waited for him there for about 30 minutes, and the moment I saw him, I waved and ran over to him. But all of my excitement vanished when he just gave me a cold look. He told me there was no need to do this and that he had to go back to the company to report the work immediately, so he couldn't go out with me. This made me feel so down. I almost burst into tears, but I tried to hold it back as I said I understood. As he walked off, I stood there still clutching the flowers and feeling embarrassed. Even worse, I met Diane walking behind Ed. She laughed sarcastically and said, "See, I told you he doesn't love you. He loves me." "He's just busy," I croaked back. There was no way I was giving her the satisfaction of thinking she had one up on me. "Yeah, whatever." She rolled her eyes. "You realize we have today off as the report's not due until tomorrow, so it seems to me like your boyfriend's just not into you." Diane grinned at me and walked off. At that point, I was so hurt and bewildered. I tried not to believe her, but there was no denying that Ed's reaction had been unexpected. I drove home feeling like a deflated balloon. Then I received a message from Ed. "Sorry, I'm just so busy. Next Saturday is better. I'll come over to yours and we can watch a movie together." I felt excited at first, but thinking about his coldness at the airport, I felt a bit confused. Talk about hot and cold. I just didn't know where I stood with him anymore. Finally, I just texted him back. "Yeah, sure." The next morning, I showed up at work, but I couldn't stop myself from trying to catch a glimpse of Ed. For the rest of the week, I kept an eye on him to see where he went, what he did, and if he met anyone strange. When he said he had to work overtime, I even called Ellie to check if he was being honest, but she confirmed this. Maybe I was being paranoid. One day, after a long working day, I felt a bit stressed, so I called Ed and said I wanted to go out with him to let off some steam. He messaged back saying that he had some family thing he couldn't get out of. I was disappointed, but I ended up going to the mall with my friend instead. We were sitting in the foyer eating donuts when I saw Ed walking into a jewelry store. This was so strange. What was he doing here? And why had he lied to me? I followed him to the front of the store and overheard him saying he needed to get a present for Ellie Stafford. Okay, so talk about a relief. So this was his family thing. Maybe today was his sister's birthday or something. But he still could have brought me along with him. Oh well, men just didn't think sometimes. Finally, Saturday arrived. Ed told me to prepare some snacks for the movie while he grabbed a quick shower. As he closed the bathroom door, I saw him leave his phone on my bed. I know it's a bad thing to do, but I couldn't stop myself from checking his private world. Maybe it's due to my worries and insecure feelings lately. I scrolled through all his old messages, but there was just a bunch of boring messages from his work colleagues. Suddenly, he opened the door and saw me using his phone. Startled, I immediately threw his phone onto the bed and jumped back. Ed looked annoyed and said, "Are you checking my phone?" I replied, "Sorry, Ed, He didn't let me finish the sentence. He angrily told me not to do it again because he didn't like to have a possessive girlfriend who wants to control his life. At this point, I was super embarrassed. Therefore, I timidly said, "I just want to see pictures from your latest business trip. Oh, I prepared your favorite snacks here. Come here." I ran to him and pulled him over to my bed. My distraction plan seemed to work, and we had a really nice night together. As good as it was, doubts still lingered in my mind. He'd just been acting so oddly recently. To be honest, the feeling of doubting the person you love is not pleasant at all. So I decided to have a clear talk with him on our upcoming 2-year anniversary. We really needed to have a frank talk. This was on Saturday night. He took me to this amazing restaurant, and the food was delicious. As great as it was, I knew I still needed to talk to him, and it was now or never. I opened my mouth to tell him how I felt when he said, "It's my mom's birthday next week, and I'd love you to come over to my house and celebrate with my family." Oh my God, this was such a surprise. Finally, after 2 years, I'd get to meet the rest of his family. This proved that he really loved me and was serious about our relationship. Right? I was so happy that I said yes and gave up on talking about my worries. Then we talked a bit about what gift we should buy for his mom. Then suddenly, Ed received a phone call. He went out to answer it, and when he came back, he said an urgent job had come up and he had to leave. As much as this sucked, I forced out a smile and told him it was fine, and I could make my own way home. He said sorry, hugged me, and left in a hurry. But just a few minutes later, my phone beeped. It was a message from Diane saying, "The Redmore Hotel, room 155. Come and see us for yourself." Smirk face icon. This had to be just one of Diane's games, right? But it seemed so strange how she'd messaged me just after Ed had left. I peered around me. Was she here spying on me? But I couldn't see her anywhere. I needed to know the truth, so I hopped in a taxi and went to the Redmore Hotel. When I got there, I was so anxious. I stood outside of room 155 and pulled out my phone to call Ed. He didn't answer, but I heard Ed's familiar ringing sound from inside of the room. At this point, I really froze and tried one more call and still heard the ringing of the phone. Unconsciously, I banged on the door and screamed out for them to let me in. I pounded the door so hard that my hands turned red. I shouted, "Open the door, you cheaters!" till my throat was sore. That moment, I didn't even know what was occupying my mind. I just knew that my heart was crushed, that I could hardly breathe, and my tears kept shedding. Moments later, the door opened, and Ed stared back at me.